here's the thing. A lot of members of the left are starting to realize that wokeness is destroying America, which is why of late you've seen some conversations about how you're not supposed to use the term wokeness, which is weird since they made it up. And so I'm fine with using the term wokeness. I intend on continuing to use that word. It is their fault that it became a poisonous word, not mine. It's because the idea is incredibly stupid.
All right, so here's the deal. Wokeness is everywhere. You can't scroll through Twitter, watch a Netflix show, or even buy a cup of coffee without someone bringing it up. And you know who's not afraid to call it out? Ben Shapiro. Love him or hate him, Ben's been on a mission to tear down woke culture brick by brick. And man, does he going hard. Let's talk about the term woke for a second. Weirdly enough, the same people who came up with it are now saying we shouldn't use it. Like, really, Ben's not having that. He's sticking with it because, hey, they made it a thing he didn't, and why should he stop using it just because it's now become toxic? That's on them, right? Ben argues that wokeness is straight up wrecking America, and to be honest, a lot of folks seem to agree with him. Remember that video I did about Ben Shapiro? Yeah, the one that blew up with thousands of likes and comments. Clearly his message is hitting home with a lot of you. Before we continue, I'd like to ask for a quick favor. If you're enjoying this content, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of our viewers watch without subscribing, and while it's free for you, it makes a world of difference to us. Have you hit that subscribe button? Awesome, thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get back to the video. So why is Ben so fired up about wokeness? Well, for starters, he says it's built on a foundation of lies, and not just one or two lies. He's talking about four big ones. First, wokeness spreads lies about America itself. Then it twists the narrative around inequality. It messes with ideas of personal responsibility. And lastly, this is the kicker, it even warps our understanding of truth itself. That's a lot of lying going on, and Ben's not shy about calling it out.
So, the problem with wokeness is that, bottom line, it promulgates lies. In particular, it promulgates four sets of lies. It promulgates lies about the nature of the United States. It promulgates lies about the nature of inequality. It promulgates lies about the nature of responsibility. And finally, it promulgates lies about the nature of truth itself.
But here's where it gets juicy. According to Ben, wokeness isn't just a bad idea, it's practically a religion. And if you think about it, that analogy kind of fits, right? He says it has all the hallmark of a cult, complete with its own unbreakable code of conduct, except here's the catch. The code is constantly shifting. One day you're woke enough, and the next you violated some new unspoken rule. You don't even know what the standard is anymore, because it keeps changing. It's like a game where the rules get rewritten every time you think you figure it out.
It's got a nearly impenetrable code. The code is constantly changing and it's constantly moving. You have no idea what the standard is from day to day, but that code is brought to you by a pretty sleek haste of really intelligent and woke people who will be able to absolve you of sin so long as you listen to everything they say. There is an intermediate.
Ben paints a picture of this woke priesthood, the intellectual elite who control the narrative and decide who gets forgiven for their sins as long as they're towing the line. Honestly, it's a clever metaphor, and Ben makes the case that this constant shifting of rules is not only confusing, but dangerous. It's impossible to follow something that's always changing, right? That's how you end up with chaos. And Ben doesn't stop there. He takes a jab at the woke crowd by comparing their belief system to a cult, not just because of its rigid beliefs, but because of how they enforce those beliefs. Think about it. If you agree with wokeness, you're absolved of all wrongs. It's like, as long as you believe, you can do no wrong. But if you step out of line, if you dare to challenge the dogma, you'll face consequences.
It's got sacrificial rights, right? People who are bad, who do not mouth the proper catechism, are immediately destroyed, and there's no forgiveness. And there's
no forgiveness. The woke mob has no mercy for those who stray from their doctrine. It sounds pretty intense, right? Almost like the plot of a dystopian novel where people live in fear of breaking unwritten rules. Ben argues that there are actually rules. In this woke world, they're just made up by the people in charge, and if you don't follow them, you're going to pay. And get this, major brands are falling right in line with it. Ford, for example, rolled out a rainbow Ford F-150 for Pride months.
Intermediary between you and wokeness. The intermediary is fairly obvious, right? It is all the members of the New York Times editorial board. It is all the people who tweet angrily on Twitter. It is your late night host, but even they have intermediaries. They have to call in some of their black friends, as we saw on all of the late night TV shows last night, in order to interpret blackness for them so that they can absolve themselves of their own white privilege.
No forgiveness. The woke mob has no mercy for those who stray from their doctrine. It sounds pretty intense, right? Almost like the plot of a dystopian novel where people live in fear of breaking unwritten rules. Ben argues that there are actually rules. In this woke world, they're just made up by the people in charge, and if you don't follow them, you're going to pay. And get this, major brands are falling right in line with it. Ford, for example, rolled out a rainbow Ford F-150 for Pride months.
Religion of wokeness suggests a bunch of conflicting things, and the only way to avoid the conflict is to just listen and repeat. Listen and believe, right? That's the basic idea here.
No forgiveness. The woke mob has no mercy for those who stray from their doctrine. It sounds pretty intense, right? Almost like the plot of a dystopian novel, where people live in fear of breaking unwritten rules. Ben argues that there are actually rules. In this woke world, they're just made up by the people in charge, and if you don't follow them, you're going to pay. And get this, major brands are falling right in line with it. Ford, for example, rolled out a rainbow Ford F-150 for Pride months.
Sex and gender are two different concepts, but gender is tied to biology. So one of the big problems that you see in sort of the argument in favor of trans rights is this notion that gender and sex are completely separable. They're not completely separable. If they are completely separable, then this means that identifying people by their subjective gender really has no relevance as to whether they are a male or a female.
No forgiveness. The woke mob has no mercy for those who stray from their doctrine. It sounds pretty intense, right? Almost like the plot of a dystopian novel, where people live in fear of breaking unwritten rules. Ben argues that there are actually rules. In this woke world, they're just made up by the people in charge, and if you don't follow them, you're going to pay. And get this, major brands are falling right in line with it. Ford, for example, rolled out a rainbow Ford F-150 for Pride months.
Here's my question. It's an argument that my friend Matt Walsh likes to make. What is a woman? Define what a woman is without reference to the word woman, please.
Yes, a rainbow truck. Now, don't get me wrong, it's great that brands want to support causes, but Ben's point is that these brands are hopping on the woke bandwagon just to stay relevant. Are they truly woke, or is this just about looking good for the cameras? But here's where things get really interesting. Ben goes further to call out who he sees as the true gatekeepers of wokeness. And it's not just activists on Twitter. Nope, according to Ben, the intermediaries are the media, the new York Times editorial board, angry Twitter mobs, and late-night TV hosts. They're the ones pushing the woke agenda. And even these so-called gatekeepers rely on their own woke intermediaries to interpret certain issues for them. Ben suggests it's gotten so ridiculous that these media figures have to call up their black friends to explain blackness to them just so they can keep up the facade and dodge accusations of white privilege.
Then you actually just disagree with medical consensus within the Western nation.
Yes, I disagree with the false medical consensus driven by politically driven, quote-unquote, doctors. If any doctor denies to me that there is a dichotomy between male and female, a sexual dichotomy between male and female, they're ignorant, and they are letting their politics get in the way of their...
Yes, a rainbow truck. Now, don't get me wrong, it's great that brands want to support causes, but Ben's point is that these brands are hopping on the woke bandwagon just to stay relevant. Are they truly woke, or is this just about looking good for the cameras? But here's where things get really interesting. Ben goes further to call out who he sees as the true gatekeepers of wokeness. And it's not just activists on Twitter. Nope, according to Ben, the intermediaries are the media, the new York Times editorial board, angry Twitter mobs, and late-night TV hosts. They're the ones pushing the woke agenda. And even these so-called gatekeepers rely on their own woke intermediaries to interpret certain issues for them. Ben suggests it's gotten so ridiculous that these media figures have to call up their black friends to explain blackness to them just so they can keep up the facade and dodge accusations of white privilege.
Who suggests to you that there is such a thing, for example, as a pregnant male is not a doctor, they are an activist.
It's almost like he's saying woke people are mindless zombies just regurgitating whatever they're told. It's harsh, but that's his take. And then, of course, Ben dives into one of the most heated issues in the woke debate: the difference between sex and gender. Woke culture insists that sex and gender are completely separate things. Ben, however, isn't buying it. He believes that gender is tied to biology, and if you try to separate the two, it just doesn't make.
We've heard that speech is violence. So if I say something you don't like, I have enacted violence upon you. I used to hear this when I would speak at college campuses. People were literally chanting speech is violence when I spoke at UC Berkeley. Also, silence is violence. So if you don't speak, that's a form of violence. So if you do speak and we don't like it, that's violence. If you don't speak, that is also a form of violence.
Gender isn't tied to biological sex, then what's the point? It's a passionate argument, and Ben makes it clear he's not here for the woke logic. He even brings up his buddy Matt Walsh's famous question, what is a woman? It's a simple question, right? But when Ben posed it to a trans activist, the response was silence.
So America has now adopted tap dancing, apparently, as its new solution, or mimery. I mean, that because if you speak, it's violence. If you don't speak, it's violence. So we have to find some other form of communication.
The activist tried to dodge the question by accusing Ben of using a logical fallacy. But let's be real, it was a pretty clear deflection. That's a typical tactic, according to Ben. When confronted with tough questions, woke people tend to pivot or throw the blame back on the person asking the question. But Ben wasn't done, yet he took on the medical consensus around trans issues, arguing that politically driven doctors are pushing a false narrative. If a doctor denies the biological difference between males and females, Ben says they're not practicing real science. They're letting their politics owe their judgment.
Just nature of wokeness is incredible. It is a substitute for religion. People are filling a God-shaped hole in their hearts with performative virtue signaling. And what the virtue signaling is really designed to do in the end is to separate you off from the non-believers.
Who suggests to you bold, right? He's not just going after activists anymore. He's calling out the entire medical establishment for bending to woke ideology. And here's where Ben really drops the mic. Anybody